Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Beatles Forever. Never fear, I'm still doing the videos on Mal Evans, according to the book Living the Legend. But today it's time for the Beatles on this date and time. It was an idea that I got recently. Once a week, I will enter things that happened to the Beatles and their circle of people around the time I post the video. So let's see what happened April the 17th, 1953. On this date, Ringo Starr's mother, Elsie Greaves, married Harry Graves, and they were married for 34 years until the death of Elsie at the age of 72. According to the Beatles story Liverpool Online, Richard Starkey was Ringo's biological father, and he was born in 1913, and he married Ringo's mother, Elsie, in 1936. Ringo, their only child, arrived in 1940, and Richard Starkey left his wife and Ringo in 1943. Not long after Ringo's third birthday. After Ringo's biological father left, Elsie took on lots of jobs to make ends meet, eventually becoming a barmaid at the Empress Pub, situated on the road in between Mandarin Street, where Ringo was born, and Admiral Grove, where he grew up. And Richard Starkey Sr., he died in 1981. Harry Graves, Ringo's stepfather and guardian. When Ringo was about 6, Elsie met Harry Graves, and they married in the early 1950s. Elsie asked Ringo if he was happy for her to marry Harry, and told him that she wouldn't if he didn't want her to. But Ringo loved Harry, and so he became his official stepdad. Ringo tended to call Harry by his first name, and around the time he married Ringo's mother, Ringo started to call his mother by her first name too. So they were known simply as Elsie and Harry, rather than Mum and Dad. Despite being very supportive of him, Ringo's parents did try to dissuade him from changing his name to Ringo Starr and giving up his job to be a drummer. Luckily, Ringo didn't listen. Ringo said, "I learned gentleness from Harry," which is a perfect summary of his stepdad. In 1963, Please Please Me, the LP, had its 4th week in the top 10, according to the UK New Musical Express chart. And Wikipedia stated, Please Please Me is a debut studio album by the English rock band The Beatles, produced by George Martin. It was released in the UK on EMI's Parlour label, 22nd of March 1963. The album's 14 tracks include cover songs and original material written by the partnership of band members John Lennon and Paul McCartney. The Beatles had signed with EMI in May 1962 and had been assigned to the Parlour label run by Martin, and they released their debut single, Love Me Do, in October, which surprised Martin by reaching number 17 on what would become the official UK singles chart. Impressed, Martin suggested they record a live album and helped arrange their next single, Please Please Me, which topped the NME singles chart. The album was well received in Britain, where it remained in the top 10 for over a year, a record for a debut album that stood for half a century. The presence of several songs written by band members Lennon and McCartney was unusual and marked the emergence of a self-contained rock band. On the other hand, the album was not released in the U.S., where the band sold poorly for most of 1963. After the statewide emergence of Beatlemania, VJ Records released a mild abridgment of the album as Introducing the Beatles in early 1964, while EMI's American label Capitol Records divided the material from Please Please Me across multiple albums. Other countries also received different versions of the album, which continued until 1987, when the entirety of the Beatles catalog was brought to CD and internationally standardized to the UK albums. Please Please Me remains critically acclaimed. It was voted the 39th on Rolling Stone's list of 500 greatest albums of all time. Then in 1970, we have the UK release of McCartney. And according to The Drive, 97.1 FM Chicago's classic rock, Paul McCartney released his debut single, McCartney, which he recorded secretly, performing all the instruments himself, with some contributions from his wife, Linda McCartney. The album, which was released 3 days later in America, was recorded during a time of estrangement with the Beatles, after John Lennon privately left the group. Songs on McCartney included Maybe I'm Amazed, The Lovely Linda, and others. The album went to number 1 in the U.S. and number 2 in the U.K. Wikipedia said that McCartney recorded the album during a period of depression and confusion following John Lennon's private departure from the Beatles in September 1969. Conflicts over the release of McCartney's album further estranged him from his bandmates as he refused to delay the album's release to allow for Apple's previously scheduled titles, notably the Beatles album Let It Be. A press release in the form of a self-interview supplied with UK's promotional copies of McCartney led to the Beatles' breakup. McCartney received mostly negative reviews, while McCartney himself was vilified for seemingly ending the Beatles. The record was widely criticized for being underproduced and for its unfinished songs, although the ballad Maybe I'm Amazed was consistently singled out for praise. In his book Fab, An Intimate Life of Paul McCartney, Howard Soanes writes of McCartney's exile at Hyde Park. This was grim for Linda. She had a 7-year-old and a baby to look after, with a husband who was depressed and drunk. She later told friends it was one of the most difficult times in her life, while Paul reflected that he might have become a rock and roll casualty at this point in his career. With Linda's encouragement, McCartney began to consider a future outside the Beatles by writing or refinishing songs for his first solo album, McCartney. Then we come to John's interview for Rolling Stone, and this was in 1970. And I'll just grab a few questions that were asked of John in this interview. How would you trace the breakup of the Beatles? After Brian died, we collapsed. Paul took over and supposedly led us, but what is leading us when we went around in circles? We broke up then, and that was the disintegration. The interviewer asked, when did you feel that the Beatles had broken up, and when did the idea first hit you? John said, I don't remember. You know, I was in my own pain. I wasn't noticing, really. I just did it like a job. The Beatles broke up after Brian died. We made the double album, The Set. It's like if you took each track off it and made it all mine and all George's. It's like I told you many times, it was just me and a backing group, Paul and a backing group, and I enjoyed it. We broke up then. And what was your feelings when Brian died? John said, the feeling that anybody has when somebody close to them dies. There's a sort of little hysterical sort of hee-hee, I'm glad it's not me or something in it. The funny feeling when somebody close to you dies. I don't know whether you've had it, but I've had a lot of people die around me. And the other feeling is, what the F? What can I do? I knew that we were in trouble then. I didn't really have any misconceptions about our ability to do anything other than play music, and I was scared. I thought, we've effing had it. And what were the events that sort of immediately happened after Brian died? Well, we went with Maharishi. I remember being in Wales, and then, I can't remember though. I will probably have to have a bloody primal to remember this. I don't remember, it's just all happened. How did Paul react? John said, I don't know how the others took it. It's no good asking me. It's like asking me how you took it. I don't know. I'm in my own head, and I can't be in anybody else's. I don't really know what George, Paul, or Ringo think anymore. I know them pretty well, but I don't know anybody that well. Yoko I know about the best. I don't know how they felt. I was my own thing. We were all just dazed. So Brian died, and then you said what happened was that Paul started to take over. John said, that's right. I don't know how much of this I want to put out. Paul had an impression, he has it now like a parent, that we should be thankful for what he did for keeping the Beatles going. But when you look back on it objectively, he kept it going for his own sake. Was it for my sake Paul struggled? Paul made an attempt to carry on as if Brian hadn't died by saying, now, boys, we're going to make a record. Being the kind of person I am, I thought, well, we're going to make a record all right, so I'll go along. So we went and made a record, and that's when we made Magical Mystery Tour. That was real. Paul had a tendency to come along and say, well, he's written these 10 songs, let's record now. And I said, well, give us a few days and I'll knock a few off, or something like that. Magical Mystery Tour was something he had worked out with Mal, and he showed me what his idea was, and this is how it went. If we went around like this, the story and how he had it all, the production and everything. Paul said, well, here's the segment. You write a little piece for that. And I thought, bloody hell. So I ran off and wrote the dream sequence for the fat woman and all the thing about the spaghetti. Then George and I were sort of grumbling about the effing movie, and we thought we better do it. We had the feeling we owed it to the public to do these things. The interviewer said, you quit the Beatles first. And then John said, yes. How? And I said to Paul, I'm leaving. I knew on the flight over to Toronto, or before we went to Toronto, I told Alan I was leaving. I told Eric Clapton and Klaus that I was leaving then, but then I would probably like to use them as a group. I hadn't decided how to do it, to have a permanent new group or what. Then later on I thought, I'm not going to get stuck with another set of people, whoever they are. I announced it to myself and the people around me on the way to Toronto a few days before, and on the plane, Klein came up to me. I told Alan it's over. When I got back, there were a few meetings, and Alan said, well, cool it. There's a lot to do, business-wise, and it would not have been suitable at the time. Then we were discussing something in the office with Paul, and Paul said something or other about the Beatles doing something, and I kept saying no, to everything he said. So it came to a point where I had to say something, of course, and Paul said, what do you mean? And I said, I mean the group is over, I'm leaving. Alan was there, and he'll remember exactly, and Yoko will, but this is exactly how I see it. Alan was saying, don't tell. He didn't want me to tell Paul even, so I said, it's out, and I couldn't stop it, and it came out. Paul and Alan both said that they were glad I wasn't going to announce it, that I wasn't going to make it an event out of it. And I don't know whether Paul said, don't tell anybody, but he was darn pleased that I wasn't going to. He said, oh, that means nothing really happened if you're not going to say anything. So that's what happened. So like anybody else, when you say divorce, their face goes all sorts of colors. It's like he knew, really, that this was the final thing. And 6 months later, he comes out with whatever. I was a fool not to do it. Not to do what Paul did, which was to use it to sell a record. The interviewer asked, you were really angry with Paul? John said, no, I wasn't angry. Well, when he came out with this, I'm leaving, no, I wasn't angry. He's a good PR man, that's all. He's about the best in the world, probably. He really does a job. I wasn't angry. We were all hurt that he didn't tell us that was what he was going to do. I think he claims that he didn't mean for it to happen, but that's BS. He called me in the afternoon of that day and said, I'm doing what you and Yoko were doing last year. I said, good. Because at that time last year, they were all looking at Yoko and me as if we were strange trying to make our life together instead of being fat myths. I was feeling a little strange because he was saying it this time, although it was a year later, and I said good, because he was the one that wanted the Beatles most. And then the midnight papers came out. The interviewer asked, how did you feel then? I was cursing because I hadn't done it. I wanted to do it. I should have done it. What a fool I was. But there was many pressures at that time with the Northern Songs fight going on. It would have upset the whole thing if I would have said that. Then we come to April 19th, 1969, Yellow Submarine, the LP, 14th week in the top 100 Billboard. And Wikipedia gave some information about the album. Yellow Submarine was the 10th studio album by the English rock band The Beatles, released in January 1969. It is a soundtrack to the animated film of the same name, which premiered in London in July 1968. The album contains 6 songs by the Beatles, including 4 new songs, and the previously released Yellow Submarine and All You Need Is Love. The remainder of the album is a re-recording selections from the film's orchestral soundtrack by the band's producer George Martin. The project was regarded as a contractual obligation by the Beatles, who were simply asked to supply 4 new songs for the film. Some were written and recorded specifically for the soundtrack, while others were unreleased tracks from other projects. The album arose from contractual obligations as part of the Beatles' 3-picture deal with United Artists. The band disliked their previous film, Help, and it was agreed that an animated film, Yellow Submarine, would fulfill their obligation. They reluctantly agreed to record 4 new songs for the album. They recently had completed the Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band in April 1967, so the group showed minimal enthusiasm for this project. Only one side of the album contains songs performed by the Beatles. Of the 6, 2 of them had been previously released. Yellow Submarine had been issued in August 1966 as a single, topping the UK chart for 4 weeks, and had also been released in the album Revolver. Following the Beatles' performance of the song on the Our World International television broadcast, All You Need Is Love had been issued as a single as well in July 1967, and had also been included on Capitol Records LP the release of the Magical Mystery Tour in November of 1967. A stereo mix was made of the song October 29, 1968, for the release on the album. On the unreleased tracks, the first to be recorded was George Harrison's Only a Northern Song, taped in February 1967 but rejected for inclusion on Sgt. Pepper. The group performed overdubs on this basic track in April, immediately after completing the stereo mixes for the album. The group performed overdubs on this basic track in April, immediately after completing the stereo mixes for the album. They had a curious session, which there was trumpet and glockenspiel and spoken voices. Harrison's lyrics reflect his displeasure at being merely a contracted songwriter to the Beatles publishing company, Northern Songs. All Together Now was recorded in a single session, May the 12th, 1967, specifically for the film project. The title came from a phrase that Paul McCartney had heard as a child to encourage everyone to sing music hall songs. He later described the song as a throwaway. The band recorded Harrison's It's All Too Much in late May 1967 at Delane Lay Studios in central London. Inspired by its author's experimentation with the drug LSD and originally running to over 8 minutes in length, the song reflects the Summer of Love philosophy in 1967 and makes extensive use of guitar feedback. As with the later recorded All You Need Is Love, the track includes musical and lyrical quotations from other works, in this case a trumpet passage from Jeremiah Clarke's Prince of Denmark's March, and a lyric from Mersey's 1966 hit Sorrow. And then John Lennon's Hey Bulldog was recorded on 11th of February 1968 and evolved from an initial intent to shoot a promotional film for the single Lady Madonna. Like All Together Now, it was specifically recorded with the film soundtrack in mind. The track's ending contained a jam session after the point where a fade-out was intended in the final mix, which was kept in the finished version. Lennon later described the song as a good-sounding record that means nothing. And then George Martin's orchestral work, Side 2, consisted of the re-recordings of the symphonic film score composed by Beatles producer George Martin specifically for the album. The recording took place with a 41-piece orchestra over 2 3-hour sessions on October 23rd and October 22nd and 23rd in 1968 in Abbey Road, and was edited down to the length of the LP on the 22nd of November. Well, I'm going to end the video here. Well, I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you haven't subscribed, if you could do so, it would help the channel to grow, as well as giving it a thumbs up. It's all a great help. And if you haven't clicked on the notification bell, if you could do that, it lets you know when a video is posted. More importantly, I want to wish everybody a good day, and tune in again soon for another edition of The Beatles on This Date. Thank you. Bye.